Hello there, and welcome to this lesson on extended tertians, which includes ninths and elevenths and thirteenths, as well as other added note chords. We're listening to Bill Evans play "We Will Meet Again." Alright, let's get started. So let's look a little bit at how tertian harmony developed. Tertian meaning chords that are stacked in thirds, as opposed to chords that are stacked in seconds or fourths or fifths, quintal and quartal and secundal harmonies. So chords that are stacked beyond the 7th, 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths, we're going to call those extended tertians. Let's look a little bit at the history of how this developed now. First of all, the perfect consonance of a fifth was prized in early music. Eventually, thirds were accepted as consonances, giving us the major triad. And then after a few hundred more years, the 7th, especially the dominant 7th, was allowed as a consonance as part of a chord instead of as a dissonance. And then as music developed, we started adding sevenths to other types of sonorities as well, such as the minor triad adding a minor seventh, then the major triad adding a major seventh on that. Then different types of diminished. We have a half diminished seventh chord and a fully diminished seventh chord. All right. Then that dominant seventh, in particular, started to be extended a little higher to a dominant ninth chord. And then if we keep going, we have dominant 11th and 13th. Let's look a bit at how the dominant ninth chord works. It's very similar in functions to a dominant seventh chord. So a dominant seventh chord would do this, and a ninth. You see that the ninth tends to resolve down like the seventh does by step. In a minor key, we would have a minor ninth. So the ninth above the root can be a major ninth or a minor ninth, or what we sometimes call a flat ninth. You can even add that flat nine in a major key to give a little bit of flavor. So dominant ninth chords are very common, but it's also possible to use non-dominant ninth chords. And again, the ninth would resolve down by step. So look at the 6, 9, 2, 9, 5, 9, some of these non-dominant ninth chords in the second part of the example. There's a 1, 9, 4, 9, 2, 9, and then a 5 flat 9, ending with a seventh in the 1 chord, which is typical in jazz harmony. So here again. All the ninths and sevenths resolve down. Okay, so you can spell these ninth chords with 5 pitches, or it's possible also to leave the fifth out if you want to do 4-part writing. Okay, let's talk a little bit about 11ths and 13ths. The 11th is unusual in that when you voice it, you typically leave out the third. So here's a typical voicing of a 5/11 chord. If you put the third in there, it really clashes with the 11th, like this, versus this, and the resolution. Okay, now the interesting thing about a dominant 13th chord, which is a very rich sounding chord, is that it has all of the diatonic pitches. So all of the pitches in the scale are in that one chord. And the last thing to note here is that when you resolve these chords, the 11th and the 13th extensions may possibly resolve as common tones, as I've shown here. The 11th becomes the tonic, or the root of the one chord, the do-do. and the 13th can also be held over to be the third of the one chord. There's a lot more that can be said about that. You can make alterations to these extensions, and that's usually indicated in the figured bass or the lead sheet, just like we saw with the flat 9 chord. So you can extend tertian harmonies by building up, stacking thirds on top, and you can also add notes to them. That's another way to extend them. For example, I could add a 2 or a 4 or a 6 or even a 9 to a triad, and that would be called an added note chord. So here's a regular G. If I add a 2 to that, see that kind of sound. Or I could add a 4 or a 6. Now in the case of the 6, it would need to be clear from the context that the root was G and not E, so that it's not an inverted E chord. And also add a 9th. It would only be an added 9th if there was no 7th, otherwise it would just be a regular 9th chord. You can also specify notes to leave out with the omit. Like if we have omitted the 3rd and we wanted to make sure that in an 11th chord, make sure that the 3rd wasn't included, we would have this. G11 omit 3. One other very common alteration in jazz harmony is what we call the sus-chord. This substitutes a 4 for a 3, so it feels kind of like a 4-3 suspension that doesn't necessarily resolve. So if I have a G7 and then I put in the 4 in place of the 3, that's my G7 sus. If I have a D9 chord and I move the 4th in place of the 3rd, that's a D minor 9 sus chord. Okay, that's it for this lesson. We've talked about extensions and additions and even omissions in the sus chord. So you should be ready for the quiz.